The caution is expected to spill over onto European markets, with the pan-region Euro Stoxx 50 futures down 0.5%, German DAX futures losing 0.5%, and FTSE futures 0.2% lower. Both the S&P 500 futures and Nasdaq futures dipped 0.1%. In Asia, MSCI's broadest index of Asia-Pacific shares outside Japan slumped 1.2%, erasing almost all of the previous week's gains stemming from optimism that China is finally opening up its economy with the dismantling of its zero-COVID policy. Chinese blue chips dropped 0.9%, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index was down 2.2%, as investors' focus shifted away from crippling COVID-19 curves to the surge in infections that is now disrupting the economy. A U.S. Consumer Price Index report on Tuesday will set the tone for markets for the week. Economists expect core annual inflation to ease to 6.1% in November, compared with a rise of 6.3% seen in the previous month. Risk could be on the upside, after data on Friday showed producer prices had increased faster than expected, fueling concerns the CPI report may indicate inflation is sticky and interest rates may have to stay higher for longer. A hotter CPI, say 6.4%, and a hawkish set of dots from the Fed and statement from Powell could see funds call it a day for 2022. Risk bleeds into 2023 and funds buy back USD shorts, said Chris Weston, head of research at Pepperstone. It would be a big surprise if we didn't see the Fed step down to a 50 BP hike. We also want to understand if Jay Powell opens the door to a slowdown to a 25 BP hiking pace from February. Again, while in line with market pricing, this could be taken that we're closer to the end of the hiking cycle and is a modest USD negative. The Federal Reserve is widely expected to raise rates by 50 basis points on Wednesday at its last meeting of 2022. Though focus will also be on the central bank's updated economic projections and Fed Chair Jerome Powell's press conference. Kevin Cummins, chief U.S. economist at NatWest, said any surprise in the CPI report was unlikely to shift the Fed from a 50 basis point rate hike, although it would play a bigger role in the policy statement and the tone of Powell's press conference. As is often the case, the updated dot plot and terminal rate estimates will be even more critical to the policy outlook than the near-term action this week, a theme Chair Powell will focus on in his prepared remarks and press conference, Cummins said. In addition to the Fed, the ECB and the Bank of England are also set to announce interest rate hikes on Thursday, with both likely to hike by 50 basis points, as policymakers continue to put the brakes on growth to curb inflation. In currency markets, the US dollar drifted 0.1% higher against a basket of currencies to 105.17, although it was not too far away from the 5-month trough of 104.1 a week ago. Sterling fell 0.3% to $1.223, while the Australian dollar also slipped 0.3% to $0.6759. Treasury yields held largely steady on Monday. The 2-year yield touched 4.338%, up slightly from its U.S. close of 4.330%. In the oil market, prices rose on uncertainty over the restart of a key pipeline supplying the United States and the threat from Russia to cut production in retaliation for a Western price cap on its exports. Brent crude futures were up 0.6% to $76.58 a barrel, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude was at $71.62 a barrel, up 0.8%. Spot gold was 0.6% lower at $1,785.78 per ounce.
Sanders says Sinema helped sabotage some of Congress's key legislations. The independent from Vermont who votes in line with Democratic interests told the show host, Dana Bash, that the left-wing party's members in Arizona were not all that enthusiastic about somebody who helped sabotage some of the most important legislation that protects the interests of working families and voting rights and so forth. And, Sanders added, if Arizona Democrats eventually ran someone to challenge the newly declared independent, I will take a hard look at supporting that candidate, though some are concerned that hopeful could unwittingly give Republicans an opening. In a separate pre-recorded interview which also aired Sunday on State of the Union, Sinema continued defending her defection from the Democrats as a stand against being beholden to party interests. I know this is really hard for lots of folks, especially, but what's important to me is to not be tethered by the partisanship that dominates politics today, Sinema said in that interview. I want to remove some of that poison from our politics. I want to get back to actually just working on the issues, working together to try and solve these challenges. Sinema's departure from the Democrats came after their party had just succeeded in getting every one of their senators re-elected for the first time since 1934 after Raphael Warnock retained his seat in Georgia on December 6. Warnock's victory over Republican challenger Herschel Walker, combined with a Pennsylvania seat flipping to the Democrats, left his party thinking it had a clear one-seat majority in the upper congressional chamber. It had spent the past 2 years with a 50-50 split in the Senate in which Vice President Kamala Harris broke ties in the Democrats' favor. Sinema, who entered politics as a Green Party member and anti-war activist, has said she doesn't intend to caucus with Republicans. But she's been vague about whether she would cooperate with the Democrats in the way that Sanders and fellow independent Senator Angus King do. Sinema has supported key Biden administration agenda items, including bills aimed at reducing inflation, protecting the right to gay marriage and increasing restrictions to high-powered guns. She and the centrist West Virginia Democratic Senator Joe Manchin, who has taken similar stands, are often mentioned in the same breath. Sinema announced her switch after a Democratic member of the House of Representatives from Arizona, Ruben Gallego, had started interviewing paid media firms for 2024, which observers interpreted as a meaningful step toward launching an intra-party primary challenge. Pundits believe the Democrats could risk splitting votes with Sinema if they run someone against her, giving Republicans an opportunity to flip that seat during an election that would unfold at the same time as the next presidential race.
Two killed in Peru protests as new president seeks early election. At least 2 people have been killed in Peru after police clashed with protesters calling for new elections and the release of detained former President Pedro Castillo. The deaths on Sunday came as protests against Castillo's impeachment and arrest expanded across Peru, most notably in northern and Andean towns. The preceded an announcement by President Dina Boluarte, the country's vice president who was quickly sworn in to replace Castillo last week. I have decided to present a bill to reach an agreement with Congress to bring forward the general elections to April 2024, Boluarte said in a speech to the nation early Monday, adding she would introduce the legislation in the coming days. Castillo, a former school teacher and union leader, was removed from his post by legislators on Wednesday after he sought to dissolve Congress ahead of an impeachment vote. The former president was arrested shortly afterwards, with prosecutors charging him with rebellion and conspiracy. Protests swiftly broke out across the country, with many supporters of the detained former leader demanding that Peru hold elections rather than allow Boluarte to stay in power until Castillo's term ends in 2026. Some protesters have also called for Congress to be shut down. It was not immediately clear if Boluarte's announcement would calm the unrest. On Sunday, protests were reported in cities across Peru's interior, including Cajamarca, Arequipa, Huancaya, Cusco and Puno. In Andahuaylas in the Apurimac region, clashes broke out as demonstrators attempted to storm the southern city's airport, authorities said. Protesters fired slingshots and hurled stones while police responded with tear gas, images from the scene broadcast by local TV showed. Eliana Rivaler, the head of Peru's ombudsman's office, told a radio station that a 15-year-old and an 18-year-old died during the clashes, possibly as a result of gunshot wounds. Baltazar Lantaran, governor of the Apurimac region, told local television station Canal N that 4 injuries are reported, treated at the health center, 3 of them to the scalp, with multiple injuries. Hundreds of people also held protests at the Legislative Palace in the Peruvian capital, Lima, where riot police used tear gas to disperse crowds. Inside the palace, the Congress had convened in an emergency session to discuss the crisis but had to be suspended after physical altercations broke out. In images posted on social media, a man could be seen punching another man from behind and members shoving each other in the center of the chamber. Prime Minister Pedro Angulo said Boluarte's newly appointed cabinet was also meeting on Sunday night to evaluate the civil unrest and determine how to respond. Meanwhile, rural unions and organizations representing indigenous peoples called for an indefinite strike, beginning on Tuesday in support of Castillo, himself the son of a peasant family. The statement from the Agrarian and Rural Front of Peru demanded Castillo's immediate release as well as the suspension of Congress, early elections, and a new constitution. The demands for new elections come as recent polls show nearly 9 in 10 Peruvians disapprove of the nation's legislature. Peru is now on its 6th president since 2016. The power struggle in the country has continued as the Andes region and its thousands of small farms struggle to survive the worst drought in a half-century. The country of more than 33 million people is also experiencing a 5th wave of COVID-19 infections, having recorded about 4.3 million cases and 217,000 deaths since the pandemic began.